Parshat Shmot. We begin our Geulah, finally, what we've been waiting for, establishing the foundation of our nation in Breshit, now the actualization of the nation itself. And we know as it begins, after Aleph and Bet and Moshe is born and grows up, Hashem finally introduces himself to an 80-year-old Moshe at the burning bush. And he gives Moshe a message and he says, look, I have to tell you, Bnei Israel and Mitzrayim, it's not going that well. They are oppressed, they are enslaved, but it's time. You and I are going to take them out of Mitzrayim and we're going to bring them to Eretz Zavat Chalav Udavash. Now this isn't new. We knew this was coming at some point because God told Avraham in the Brit Ben Abtarim, they're going to be enslaved, they're going to be oppressed, and then I'm going to take them out. And we know ultimately in Parshat Bo, in Perek Yud Bet, they're finally going to come out. And we know this is a significant episode. There are holidays, Pesach, based on Yetziat Mitzrayim. We know that we're supposed to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim daily. So it's unquestionably a significant moment in our history. And there are many Mefarshim and different approaches as to why, but ultimately, inarguably, it's when God creates us into a nation. We started as a family, we then turned into a tribe, and then we were a people in Mitzrayim. But not until Yetziat Mitzrayim did we become a nation, and not only did we become a nation, we became a nation of Hashem and Am Hashem. And just that would be significant. Just that would be enough for us to say, I'm going to eat matzah on that day. I'm going to tell this story. That's when it all begins. Let's start the Aseret HaDibrot with that line, and everything else is just the details. But I believe Yetziat Mitzrayim is something bigger. That in and of itself, it's important, but it's bigger than just itself. And I want to look at the second paragraph of the Hallel. B'tzeit Yisrael mi-Mitzrayim. Okay? B'tzeit Tehillim Kuf Yodalet. B'tzeit Yisrael mi-Mitzrayim. Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez. When Bnei Israel came out of Mitzrayim, the parallel phrasing of Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez. Haita Yehuda lekodsho Yisrael mamshalotav. Yehuda and Yisrael were set up, were already in rule, were already established. Then the parak goes on and says, Hayam ra'av vayanos, Hayarden yisov le'achor. The Yam Suf, saw and fled, and the Yarden turned backwards. Harim rakdu che'elim givaot kivnei tzon. The mountain shook like your rams, the mountain like sheep, and so on. If you look at those lines, you can immediately pick up on our history. Hayam ra'av vayanos, that's Yam Suf, right after B'tzeit Yisrael mi-Mitzrayim, and the parallel crossing is the Yarden later. But we came out of Mitzrayim, and then a body of water split for us. Then after we split that water and we walked through, then it was the mountains were shaking, i.e. Har Sinai. So brilliantly, the author of this parak is describing our chronological journey from creation of a nation until we get the Torah and we get the contract. What should stand out to you, however, is there's an anachronistic line. Because while the parak does mention Knisa La'aretz, which is of course the fourth stage, Yetziat Mitzrayim, Yam Suf, the Torah, and then Knisa La'aretz, it would have been perfect, except it mentioned the fourth stage second. And the strangest part is, because it mentions the second and third stage in the right order, It means that it was doing the right order, and there is a purposeful misplacement with the last stage. You're supposed to say there's 1, and there's 4, and then there's 2 and 3. And I think as you're reading this parak, you have to question, why, if the author is purposely already setting up a perfect chronological map of the different stops we made, why then ruin it with an anachronistic line? Put it in order. We can follow the map. Why purposefully decide that the 4th stage should be the 2nd? And I think the answer should be fairly clear. Because what the author is trying to tell us, that B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez, at the moment of Yetziat Mitzrayim, things are going to play out. Then they're going to get to the Midbar, then they're going to get to Yam Suf, then they're going to get to Har Sinai. But don't misunderstand, while there are stages before the K'nisa La'aretz, the ultimate goal of Yetziat Mitzrayim is getting to Eretz Yisrael. B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim Beit Yaakov Ma'amez. Before anything else happens, know that Yehuda Haita Yehuda lekodsho Yisrael mamsholotav. B'nei Yisrael, you have to know Eretz Yisrael is already waiting for you. The beginning of K'nisa La'aretz is Yetziat Mitzrayim. From the very get-go, when God turned to Avraham in Brit Ben Abtarim and said, I got to tell you a little history, a little future of the history. Your descendants are going to go down to a foreign land, and it's going to take a long time that they're going to be there. There's going to be oppression, and there's going to be enslavement, and then they're going to leave, but then they're going to come back. In the same breath that God says Yetziat Mitzrayim, he then says, and then K'nisa L'Eretz Yisrael. And when he appears to Moshe at the Sneh in our Parsha, he says, you should know, Moshe, that my nation is suffering and enslaved and murdered in Eretz Mitzrayim, and you and I are going to take them out. But then we're going to take them to Eretz Yisrael. And in next week's Parsha, when God tells Moshe the message, the 5 Leshonot of Geulah, Ve'hotzeiti v'itzalti v'ga'alti. Oh yeah, I'm going to take them out of Mitzrayim. But don't forget Ve'heveti, because the beginning always has an ending. The beginning, as significant as it is in its own right, is only ultimately important because it's the beginning of the final stage. And don't think for a second that when we were created as a nation, that was important in its own right. And don't think for a second that if that was important, then of course the contract with God at Har Sinai was important in its own right, because that was also a pre-stage to our entering into our land when we can best connect with God. We had to be Am Hashem. And we had to accept that with a Torat Hashem. But unless all that comes together in the Eretz Hashem, then we've lost the opportunity that God created from Yetziat Mitzrayim. Do you think for a second that when the Torim and then the Bnei Yisrael that backed them up said, we can't go into Eretz Yisrael, that God said, fine, you're not going and you will die here, just because it's one of the stages that God wanted to happen? So when Bnei Yisrael denied it, he got angry? In denying the desire to enter Eretz Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael were in fact undermining the entire plan of God. Then why did you become a nation? Then why did I give you the Torah? If you're not going to live in Eretz Yisrael, then why do we begin this plan to begin with? It is clear to me that every time you think of Yetziat Mitzrayim, you have to ensure that you understand that its most important aspect was giving Bnei Yisrael the opportunity to then go with God into Eretz Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom.